Continuing on with stylistic devices, I want to spend some time working with one of the really rich ones, and one that is easy to write, or can be easy to write, but has a lot of payoff: antithesis. Antithesis is just, at the broadest level, pairing contrasting words or ideas. So you can hear this and these typically are sort of famous lines. Good antithesis will probably be a famous line if it's in a famous speech. So here we are in FDR's first inaugural speech, a well-known line, a well-imitated line.
Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself.
So antithesis is very powerful, and we can even actually get sort of more specific within antithesis, and you can run it through antimetaboly. Antimetaboly, we're being very equation-y, and the beats on antimetaboly are A, B, B, A. So you've got contrast, but you've got this sort of pairing of phrases in one order and then in reverse order. So you can hear this in another famous inaugural address line, JFK's first inaugural address.
And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
So in that clip, I mean, you've got antimetaboly, A, B, B, A. Your country, you, your country, okay? And we can hear this same pattern repeating itself quite a bit, and it works well in political discourse, and it works well in all discourse, because there's something about that phrasing. We can recognize that as doing something. It sounds different. We don't often necessarily speak in antithesis or in antimetaboly. Here's an example from Reagan's speech at the Brandenburg Gate in 1987.
But we must remember a crucial fact. East and West do not mistrust each other because we're armed. We're armed because we mistrust each other.
So, I mean, you have style performing an argumentative function there, but it makes it that much clearer, that much more salient when we run it through style and we don't lose its meaning. Rather, we highlight its meaning. So we've got antithesis, move on to oppositio. So we've got sort of figures of repetition and then figures of working up. So oppositio, you take a concept and you just basically provide different phrasings or different ways of understanding that core idea. So if we listen to Earl Warren's eulogy for JFK after he was assassinated, you hear working up, you've got the term, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and then you're going to hear all the sort of substitute phrases for that name.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy, a great and good president, a friend of all people of goodwill, a believer in the dignity and equality of all human beings, a fighter for justice, an apostle of peace, has been snatched from our midst by the bullet of an assassin.
So, I mean, that's a very long one, but there's almost sort of a suspension of the sentence. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, then we hear all these phrasings, all these elaborations on who he was, or what he believed in. And then we hear the rest of the sentence, has been snatched from our midst by the bullet of an assassin. So the sentence is, John Fitzgerald Kennedy has been snatched from our midst by the bullet of an assassin. But we've got this gap, this space, where we can sort of suspend our anticipation of what's going to follow for the rest of the phrase as we hear these deliberate working up of that idea. That's a very elaborate one. We've been doing a lot with the Kennedys this lecture. Let's go ahead and listen to Edward Kennedy's speech, where I won't get too much into it, but this is a speech following the Chappaquiddick incident, where a young woman had been killed and he had been in the driver's seat, and there was a lot of controversy about how responsible he was for her death. And at the time, he was asking the people, he's going directly to the people he represented and asking if they wanted him to remain in his position. So you just hear a very brief use of oppositio.
So I ask you tonight, the people of Massachusetts, to think this through with me. In facing this decision, I seek your advice and opinion. In making it, I seek your prayers.
So I mean, that's just a very small use of oppositio, but it shows how it can be incorporated into maybe more pedestrian speeches. And the last thing I want to talk about under stylistic devices is schisis onomaton. So if oppositio is taking a small idea and providing sample phrases, schisis onomaton would just be very elaborate variations of a phrase. Now I can't include this clip, it's a copyrighted clip, but from the movie Malcolm X, there's this great passage where, as you can see here, it says every time you break a seal on that liquor bottle, that's a government seal that you're breaking. I say it and I say it again, you've been had. So here, that's the core phrase. And then everything else is an elaboration on that, a reworking of that phrase. You've been had, you've been took, you've been hoodwinked, bamboozled, led astray, run amok. That's what he does. So you've got all these various ways of running that key idea through various iterations. Perhaps one of the best examples of this, I will link to on the course page, but is Monty Python's This Is a Dead Parrot. An entire comedy routine based upon elaborations on that phrase, this is a dead parrot. So if those are stylistic devices, sort of generally we can think about maxims, or sometimes we could call this cell sentences. And these would just be sort of short sentences that capture the core idea of your speech. If your speech were reduced to a single sentence, what would that sentence say? Or if your speech was given a title after the fact, what would that title be? Because normally, a lot of Churchill speeches are named after the maxim that was used in that speech. The beaches speech, or toil and blood speech. So this is thinking in terms of where do I want to have sort of a main sentence that really captures the key idea of the speech. And in fact, staying with Churchill, as you're thinking about writing these stylistic devices, are coming up with a really good sentence that anchors a paragraph. He's got this quotation where he says, short words are best and the old words, when short, are best of all. So you're really trying to find in language this familiar strangeness. We want to be crystal clear in our style, but it should hit the ear in an interesting way, in a sublime way. A great example of one of Churchill's maxims, cell lines, was in talking about the Battle of Britain and saying, this was their finest hour, that this was their finest hour speech, where we build up to it and he says, if the Commonwealth should last for 1,000 years, men will still say, this was their finest hour. It's a really captures the core idea of that speech. Also, we can return to Reagan's remarks at the Brandenburg Gate, because there's a famous line there, and how people remember that speech, all built around what is the key sentence that captures the essence of what he was talking about. Let's take a listen to it.
We welcome change and openness, for we believe that freedom and security go together, that the advance of human liberty can only strengthen the cause of world peace. There is one sign the Soviets can make that would be unmistakable, that would advance dramatically the cause of freedom and peace. General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
I like that clip because it actually has two maxims, two cell sentences back to back, and open this gate and tear down this wall. One time I was lecturing on this, and I had an audience, and I showed the image of the Brandenburg Gate, and I said, well, what's the cell sentence from this speech, the maxim from this speech? And I actually had Germans in the audience, and a German said, yes, open this gate. All the Americans in the audience like, no, it's tear down this wall. And I'm like, actually, it's both. They didn't know that line sort of immediately preceded tear down this wall. And the Germans were saying, well, when we learned about the speech or when we hear the speech, that's the line that stands out for us, not tear down this wall. So, style and style usage, even though I would say these equations of eloquence translate across languages, its style is obviously very culture and language dependent. But even in this sentence, or in this clip, you can hear as Reagan's delivering it, the audience eats up the "open this gate." Yeah, that sounds great. And you can almost hear him saying like, yeah, you thought that one was great. You're going to love this one. And so I think you can look at those two cell sentences, "open this gate" and "tear down this wall," and whichever one speaks to you more, think about, well, why is that? Open this gate, we've got metaphors of openness. That sounds good. Tear down this wall. Boy, there's a finality to that doesn't happen with open this gate. You can always close the gate again. Close the gate before the cat gets out. So there's a contrast on these, but tear down this wall has sort of a finality to it. So whatever you're doing, you want to make sure that you've done this style well. You don't want to fall into that Dean trap. So the Howard Dean scream. So let's go ahead and end here our section on stylistic devices. Go back over these stylistic devices and try writing a line or two for a speech for this class or a speech that you're working on for some other environment, and really try to incorporate that stylistic device well. Integrate it into what you're working on.